1900 fought in northern France. The world had just begun to bleed. In a frostbitten stretch of land near the village of Saint-Marneau, workers digging foundations for a new railway depot unearthed something that shouldn't have been there. Beneath a shallow layer of mud lay dozens of skeletal remains arranged, not buried. Uniform buttons, rusted dog tags, and fragments of torn fabric still clung to the bones, the insignias belonging to a regiment that, according to military records, never existed. The discovery was documented quietly by local authorities in 1923, but the report was sealed, marked for internal review classification pending. Decades later, when that file was accidentally declassified, historians noticed something disturbing. Each skull had been fractured in the same way, precisely, cleanly, as though the soldiers had not died in battle but in execution. The timeline didn't fit, the uniforms didn't match any known division, and yet the remains dated unmistakably to the earliest months of World War I. What followed would become one of the most unnerving, forgotten stories of the Great War, one that history had deliberately erased. Why were these soldiers written out of every record? And why did those who tried to uncover their story begin to disappear themselves? Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Because what you're about to hear might change the way you think about the heroes we honor and the ghosts we forget. It began, as most buried horrors do, with silence. The year was 1914. Europe was unraveling under the weight of alliances and pride. In France, small villages like Saint-Marneau became invisible dots on a war map, places where young men marched in and never returned. When the first wave of British expeditionary troops crossed into France that August, the air smelled of smoke, fear, and something older, like the earth itself, was remembering. Saint-Marneau was supposed to be quiet, far from the front lines. But as the war intensified, the French army quietly converted its ancient monastery into a makeshift command post and hospital. Locals record eerie sounds at night, chanting, metallic echoes, the rhythmic pounding of shovels long after curfew. Some claimed they saw soldiers hundreds marching toward the woods at midnight and never coming back. Wasn't until the war ended that whispers began to circulate about the Phantom Regiment, a battalion that had appeared, fought a single battle, and then vanished without record. A British war nurse named Evelyn Harcourt, stationed nearby, wrote in her diary, "Is greater than the man from the 44th, they said. They were ordered to dig trenches in the East Field. They never came back. Command denies their existence." That diary, now stored in the Imperial War Museum, would become the first clue in an investigation that stretched across a century. Historians originally dismissed Evelyn's words as delusion born of shell shock. But in 1998, a team of researchers reviewing forgotten medical files stumbled upon a handwritten memo. "Is greater than subject, Saint-Marneau Battalion. Orders redacted under Directive 1914A. All correspondence to cease. Directive 1914. It didn't appear anywhere else in wartime archives. It was, by all definitions, a phantom order. And yet, the handwriting matched that of a known intelligence officer, Major Philippe Dureau, who himself vanished in 1915. That was the pivot moment, the moment modern researchers realized that this forgotten regiment wasn't a myth. It had been real, and its erasure had been deliberate. To understand why, we need to go back to the early months of the war, before the trenches were permanent scars, before gas and barbed wire defined human cruelty. The French army was stretched thin. Hundreds of volunteers, prisoners, and foreign laborers were hastily conscripted into irregular units. These temporary divisions were meant to serve support roles, digging trenches, delivering ammunition, clearing corpses. They were ghosts even while alive, unrecorded, unnamed, expendable. But the men of Saint-Mano, later known only through fragments of reports as the 6th Auxiliary Regiment, were different. Testimonies suggest they were gathered under unusual circumstances. Some were deserters from other armies. Others were convicts, promised amnesty for service, and among them were foreign soldiers, Russians, Belgians, even one Ottoman defector. No flags, no insignias. They were led by a man few records ever mention, Captain Armand Lefebvre, a military scholar turned intelligence operative. Described as brilliant but unstable, Lefebvre had a fascination with ancient rituals of loyalty and control. Colleagues said he often quoted obscure Latin texts claiming that sacrifice binds armies more tightly than victory. In September 1914, Lefebvre's unit was stationed outside Saint-Manu for a classified operation. Officially, they were to secure an abandoned crypt under the old monastery rumored to contain enemy communications equipment. But when villagers later entered the ruins, they found no equipment, only blood, candles, and circles carved into the stone floor. Strange patterns. As researchers reconstructed the timeline, they discovered that every man assigned to the 6th Auxiliary Regiment vanished between September 3rd and September 6th, 1914. Not one letter home, not one record of reassignment. Meanwhile, strange entries began appearing in military hospital logs, patients exhibiting violent tremors, muttering in foreign tongues, describing dreams of marching endlessly in fog. One doctor's note read, "Is greater than patient claims to hear the anthem of the dead, says his comrades are calling from the ground. Requests to be buried near Saint-Mano." The more evidence emerged, the clearer it became that something profoundly wrong had taken place. In 1920, a regional newspaper, Le Courrier du Nord, attempted to publish an article titled "The Regiment That Never Was." The story vanished before print, and the journalist Jules Rivière resigned abruptly, citing threats from above. His last surviving notebook contained a single line, "Is greater than they were not killed in battle. They were offered." Foreshadowing, red flags. Years later, when archaeologists reopened the site after the 1923 railway dig, they found a sealed room beneath the monastery foundations. Inside were fragments of wooden tablets inscribed with symbols half military, half occult. On one, the Latin phrase, "Fide per mortem," faith through death. These findings were never officially published. The excavation's chief researcher, Dr. Henri Mauclair, wrote in a confidential letter, "Is greater than whatever they did here was not war, it was worship. But who or what were they worshipping?" Then Mauclair vanished during a return trip from Calais. His luggage, found weeks later, contained one undeveloped photograph showing a field of fog and in the mist rows of shadowed figures standing motionless, their outlines faint but uniform. To this day, no one can confirm whether that image was genuine or a damaged exposure. What is certain is this. From 1914 onward, the name Saint-Mano was removed from military maps. All correspondence related to Directive 1914A was destroyed. And the families of those who served in the 6th Auxiliary Regiment received nothing, no notice, no medals, no graves. They were not simply forgotten, they were erased. The first part of our journey into this haunting chapter of World War I ends here with a single chilling question. What really happened beneath the monastery of Saint-Mano in September 1914? By the time the first rumors reached the upper command in Paris, Saint-Mano was already gone. The front lines had shifted and the region lay in ruins. Officially, it was written off as destroyed during the retreat, a vague note buried in logistics reports. But decades later, aerial reconnaissance photographs revealed something that contradicted the claim the monastery had not been destroyed. It had been deliberately sealed. Massive slabs of concrete covered the original crypt, reinforced with military precision. Someone, somewhere, had gone to great lengths to ensure that whatever lay beneath would never be unearthed again. For decades, the story stayed buried until 1952, when a retired French colonel named Lucien Morel began investigating wartime anomalies for a book on forgotten units. He had served during the Second World War and had access to certain restricted archives. Morel's notes describe an eerie pattern he uncovered. Across multiple military districts, requisition orders for ammunition and rations were recorded for a battalion that didn't exist, the same unit name, 6th Auxiliary Regiment, recurring again and again in ghost entries. The requisitions stopped suddenly after September 6, 1914, the very date the men vanished. Morel's curiosity turned into obsession. He visited Saint-Malo, now an overgrown ruin, swallowed by forest. Locals avoided the place, calling it La Terre des Ombres, the land of shadows. In interviews, elderly villagers spoke of nights when they heard boots marching in the woods, synchronized footsteps, fading into nothing. Some swore that during foggy dawns they saw a pale figure standing between the trees, motionless, watching. When Morel returned from his field visit, he was a changed man. His wife later told police that he refused to sleep indoors and often whispered that they're still following orders. He died 2 years later in what authorities ruled a suicide, though no weapon was ever recovered. In his study, investigators found a single page torn from his unfinished manuscript. The words were smeared but legible. Lefebvre's men did not die, they were bound. Captain Armand Lefebvre, the man who led the 6th Regiment, remains one of the strangest figures in French military history. Born in Lyon in 1876, Lefebvre studied ancient history before joining the army. His fascination with rituals of discipline bordered on obsession. Former peers described him as charismatic, persuasive, but unnervingly detached. One officer recalled that Lefebvre once conducted a loyalty ceremony for his men that involved blindfolds and recitations in Latin, something he claimed would bind them beyond death. Surviving documents suggest that Lefebvre had been corresponding secretly with a group of military philosophers who believed that human will could be transmuted into permanent obedience through ritual sacrifice. The ideology mirrored certain fringe occult movements rising in Europe at the time, groups that combined mysticism with militarism, claiming that the soul of a loyal soldier could serve forever if properly consecrated. Was Lefebvre simply delusional, or had he been experimenting under orders? Some letters hint that his superiors tolerated his eccentricities because of his results. His men, though untrained, reportedly followed orders with almost mechanical precision, but at Saint-Malo, something changed. Witnesses from neighboring battalions later recalled strange lights near the monastery, rhythmic gunfire that didn't sound like combat, short bursts, evenly timed, like a ritual, then nothing. No more orders. No more man. Just silence. When the 1998 research team reopened the classified archives, they found a file mislabeled under Psychological Warfare Experiments, early WWI. Inside were partial transcripts from a debriefing of a surviving messenger who had deserted Lefebvre's camp days before the disappearance. His name was André Cloutier, a 19-year-old courier. The transcript, though faded, reads like the testimony of a man who had seen something beyond comprehension. Is greater than Captain Lefebvre said the war would never end, that France needed soldiers who couldn't die. He said we would be remembered as the first immortal regiment. That night he ordered us to form ranks inside the crypt. He read from a book in Latin. The lights went out. Then there was screaming, not fear, but command. I ran. I never looked back. Cloutier was executed for desertion 2 weeks later. His statement, however, was quietly preserved, sealed with a note, unfit for public record, psychotic delusion. But researchers noticed something uncanny. The Latin passage he quoted from recorded phonetically in the transcript was traced to a 12th century monastic text banned by the Church, De Servitude Aeternum, or the Doctrine of Eternal Servitude. The text described a ritual through which the souls of warriors could be anchored to the earth through oaths sealed in blood. Was Lefebvre performing an ancient rite disguised as a military exercise? The pieces began to align in unsettling ways. Hidden motives and cover-up. Why would the military allow such madness? Documents recovered from the French War Ministry indicated in August 1914 panic spread through the ranks as German forces advanced faster than expected. Morale was collapsing and desertions rose daily. Desperate commanders authorized psychological experiments aimed at preserving loyalty. Lefebvre, with his background in history and symbolism, was assigned to test innovative morale protocols. What he did under that authorization remains classified, but the aftermath tells the story. When higher command received reports of strange activity in Saint-Malo, they dispatched an inspection unit. That team never returned. 3 days later, the entire area was quarantined under the pretext of an outbreak. By the time reinforcements arrived, the site was empty except for the sealed crypt. The official report, unearthed in fragments, concludes with a chilling line: is greater than Operation Eternum successful. Recommend containment over recovery. That phrase, Operation Eternum, has never appeared in any other wartime documentation. It was as if an entire operation had been written out of history, its participants condemned to vanish both in body and record, community reactions, and forced narratives. In the years that followed, Saint-Malo became the subject of ghost stories whispered in neighboring villages. Soldiers stationed nearby during later wars spoke of losing entire nights while marching hours erased, compasses spinning, radios going dead. Locals avoided the area, claiming the ground hummed beneath their feet. When television crews attempted to film a documentary in 1976, their cameras malfunctioned repeatedly. Only one piece of footage survived, a wide shot of the ruined monastery. At the edge of the frame, a faint line of mist drifts across the field, and within it, shapes that seem almost human. Experts have since dismissed the image as optical interference, but those who've seen it describe feeling physically ill afterward, as if something inside the film was looking back. Government officials maintained silence. When questioned about the missing regiment, the Defense Ministry claimed records lost due to fire. Yet, privately, one anonymous source told a historian, is greater than some sacrifices make victory possible. Not all soldiers fight with rifles. The historian never published that interview. He died 6 months later of a reported heart attack at age 43. His notes, found later, contain a map hand-drawn, incomplete, showing a network of underground tunnels leading from the monastery to the nearby forest. On it, he had written a single phrase in red ink, still marching. By the late 2000s, digital archives made cross-referencing easier. Amateur researchers began sharing clues online. A small collective of historians and data analysts, calling themselves Les Oubliés, the Forgotten Ones, compiled thousands of wartime inconsistencies pointing to the existence of the 6th Regiment. They believed that what happened at Saint-Malo was not an isolated event, but part of a larger wartime experiment that spread across multiple fronts, a test of ritualized loyalty that cost hundreds of lives. Their final report, leaked in 2011, claimed to have located the sealed crypt using thermal imaging. But before the group could organize a formal excavation, French authorities abruptly restricted access to the site, citing soil contamination. Shortly after, the group's leader, Dr. Elise Roux, vanished while traveling to Calais, ironically, the same route where Dr. Mauclair had disappeared decades earlier. Only one email from Roux was ever recovered, sent hours before she vanished. is greater than I have seen the list of names. They were never meant to be remembered, and yet the ground remembers. The investigation into Saint Mano now teetered between historical mystery and supernatural legend. Every lead seemed to circle back to the same impossible question. What exactly did Lefebvre do beneath that monastery in 1914? The answer, as it would soon be revealed, was more horrifying than anyone had imagined. When the French Ministry of Defense finally opened the classified archives in 1998, the investigators expected to find simple administrative negligence, perhaps a list of soldiers lost in a bureaucratic shuffle. What they discovered instead sent ripples through the historical community. Among the brittle folders marked non retournés, confidential lay field reports written in trembling hands, sealed with faded wax and never meant to be read again. The contents didn't speak of victory or even tragedy, they spoke of horror. The missing battalion of Verdun hadn't been captured, nor had they defected. According to recovered correspondence between General Martin and Colonel Dupré, an experiment had been authorized deep within the Argonne Forest, an attempt to test a new kind of chemical stimulant designed to eliminate fear and fatigue in soldiers. But something went catastrophically wrong. The diary of Lieutenant Paul Mercier, the only surviving first-hand witness, was the first document to break the illusion of a normal military disappearance. His entries began orderly and precise, like any officer's log, weather conditions, coordinates, rations. But as the pages progressed, his handwriting deteriorated into jagged, uneven scrawls. One line, written in charcoal because ink had run dry, stood out is greater than they no longer sleep, they no longer speak, the air hums when they breathe. Mercier described how, after days of inhaling the experimental vapor, soldiers began to lose touch with reality. They stood motionless through the night, eyes open but unseeing, as if listening to something underground. He mentioned whispers not from men but from the forest itself, echoing in synchronization with the soldiers' breathing. Within a week, they stopped eating. They stopped obeying commands. They simply waited. When headquarters sent a retrieval unit, only one member of the team returned. His report was dismissed as wartime hysteria. He claimed the trenches were filled with figures that shimmered faintly in the mist, their uniforms colorless, their eyes black as tar. Every photograph taken that night came out fogged and overexposed, as though the negatives had been burned from within. That man was committed to a sanitarium in Rouen 3 months later, babbling the same sentence again and again. They're still marching down there. By the mid-20th century, whispers of the Verdun phantoms had turned into a local legend among the French countryside. Farmers who tilled near the Argonne front claimed their plows struck not rocks, but bones still clutching rusted rifles. Some nights when the wind shifted west, the rhythmic pounding of boots could be heard beneath the soil, steady, unbroken, like a parade that never ended. For years, skeptics dismissed the legend as trauma manifesting through folklore. But when Dr. Claire Menard, a military anthropologist from the University of Reims, led a modern excavation in 2014, exactly a century after the men vanished, she uncovered something that history couldn't easily explain. Using ground-penetrating radar, her team detected rows upon rows of metallic outlines arranged in perfect formation 40 feet underground. Stand combat endurance, a biological triumph for France's desperate front. But the compound wasn't designed for human consciousness. It didn't enhance, it consumed. The soldiers, once exposed, began exhibiting synchronized behavior, standing motionless for hours, repeating the same words, even blinking in unison. The field surgeon's final note, dated October 1914, reads, "Is greater than I no longer know if they're dying or evolving." A week later, the battalion vanished. Command ordered the forest bombarded to contain contamination. No recovery mission was launched. The site was sealed under the pretext of structural instability. Officially, those men were declared missing in action. Unofficially, they were erased not for honor, but for fear. And perhaps fear was justified. When samples from the site were